seeing how hard my dad worked inspired me not to become a farmer. A lot of the challenges that we see in agriculture, from government policy to supply chain optimization, are all data problems. And what we are trying to do is really become that data bank to really make sure that Africa agriculture is competitive. I remember my first fundraise, I spoke to about 139 investors, and only 5 said yes at the time. So I see a lot of founders who speak to 5 or 10 investors, hear 10 no's, and that's it. The truth is, at the beginning stages, nobody knows your business, and so you shouldn't be surprised at the no's. If you were setting up a business, you always would look at what the users want. But when it comes to farming, everyone thinks because it's food, let's just dive right in and people would buy. Farming is not a security. You can't treat farming as a debt instrument.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deji Adebusoye. Welcome to the Diary of an African Entrepreneur. Joining me today is Desmond Kony, the CEO and founder of Complete Farmer in Ghana. Most entrepreneurs start with a dream. They see a gap in the market, they write a business plan, and they chase a vision. But my guest today didn't start with a dream, he started with a death. In 2013, Desmond Kony was a mechanical engineer, a product designer focused on operations, efficiency, and machines. He had no interest whatsoever in agriculture, but when his father passed away suddenly, he was left with a legacy he didn't ask for, a small pineapple farm in Ghana. He did what any dutiful son would do. He took it over dismally. The crops failed, the logistics broke down, and the money ran out. But in the ashes of that failure, the engineer in Desmond woke up. He stopped looking at the farm as a piece of land and started looking at it as a factory floor. He realized that the problem wasn't the soil, the problem was the lack of data, protocols, and precision. Today, Desmond, the CEO of Complete Farmer, the company is completely rewriting the script on African agriculture. They aren't just growing food, they are building an end-to-end digital marketplace that connects African growers to global supply chains using data to treat farming with the same rigor as software engineering. He's connecting the diaspora back to the continent. He's turning smallholder farms into data-driven powerhouses, and he's proving that the next agricultural revolution won't come from a tractor, it will come from the cloud. Desmond, welcome to the Diary of an African Entrepreneur.
Thank you very much, Deji, for having me, and thank you for really just summarizing my entire life in that introduction. Great stuff. Yeah.
Pleasure having you. But to get right into this conversation, Desmond, I think it's important to mention to everybody listening that our company, Sire Capital, also invested in Complete Farmer, which shows that the confidence we have, in the company. One of the things that led you on this journey was the death of your father. And at that point, there was a pineapple farm in Ghana that you felt you had to take over. Why? Many people could just have said, it's a pineapple farm, it's small, I'm not interested. But why did you decide at that point you wanted to take over the farm?
So I grew up my whole life on that farm. And I think growing up, I saw how hard my dad worked the pineapple farm. Managed to send 4 kids to university from that pineapple farm, despite all the struggles. But it was something he had poured a lot into. And also being the first son in my family, usually in African tradition, the first son inherits the dad's assets. And so this was more of a legacy that was handed over. And I think just realizing how much had been poured into the farm, it's really something that I had to take up the challenge and just keep that legacy going for him. So that's really what got me back into agriculture. After a long while of trying to run away from agriculture, in fact, like seeing how hard my dad worked, it inspired me not to become a farmer. Studied how to be a mechanical engineer, went to China to figure out how to build stuff, worked in a few production environments in China before doing that. But it's just because of how hard my dad had worked, I thought it was something that it's a legacy that needs to go on. And that's really why I went back for the farm.
So the farm failed. At what point did you realize that it was not going to work? What happened? What was the specific point that made you realize this is not working?
We had a lot of issues, and I think the issues that led to the farm failing is very synonymous to other African farmers. And I think since that farm failed, I've heard stories of people whose fingers got bent trying to go into farming. There was a lot of there was lack of planning or rigor. So like people would approach farming and say, "Oh, we are going to grow pineapples today," without really looking at the market conditions. I mean, if you were setting up a business, you always would want look at what the users want. But when it comes to farming, everyone thinks because it's food, let's just dive right in and people would buy. And what we ended up realizing was, look, the big guys who buy most of our foods don't just buy anything from the market. And this is why farmers complain we don't have markets. The big FMCGs are looking for specific quality that really needs to be tailored into the production for you to have a market. And so that was one of the first lessons we learned, and that's what led to the failure. Was we were just producing, let's produce pineapple year on year without looking at what really the market needs. And the market was changing at the time. Ghana pineapple had been banned from Europe because of some farmers sending bad products into Europe. And so once that ban happened, it just affected the cash flow of the whole farm. Aside from that, also when this cash flow issue started, there was a lot of like management issues. People thought, "Oh, who is this young guy who?" They were more loyal to my dad than they were to me. It's like they literally saw me grow up, so there wasn't much respect or for the management system that I was trying to put in place. So those were some of the key factors that led to the failure of the farm. But it's really, I think the experience really made me see what African agriculture is firsthand for myself and how things can just, you can have a good production system just going bust in a split second when market dynamics change. And that's something that led us to starting Complete Farmer.
So on that exact segue, so how did that failure inspire the business model that you started with at Complete Farmer?
I think I'm someone who really get challenged by failing at something. I thought to myself, look, I've been able to work in complex production systems. How can I be whipped by a 60-acre farm? So there was a bit of ego to make me want to like do this differently. But I think in during the process, the failure wasn't so sudden. It was an ongoing failure story. And I think learning throughout all that failure story of this farm, at some point when the farm failed, I felt I had learned enough to correct my mistakes. And so I was really dying for an opportunity to say, look, how do I, now that I've learned from all these failures, from mismanagement, from bad agronomy, from bad planning of a farm, how do I then now put all those learnings into something and also use that to help other farmers? And so I think it got to a point where the farm was now not a farm. Then I realized, look, there's been so much I'd learned through this experience, and then this is where the light bulb went off on for me. And I realized that if the farm was a factory, like if you think of farms and if you think of factories, with factories, all the raw materials come to one location. There's some production process and goods leave the factory to customers. It's similar to for a farm. Your seeds, your fertilizers come to one location. Nature does its processes, and then you have the food going out to the markets. So that insight or that light bulb is what really made me feel like, look, if I were to do this again and to do this in a way that I'm very comfortable with, which was to try and bring manufacturing into farming, then I would have better chances of doing this very well. And that's really what challenged me to say, look, let me still keep going because I felt I'd learned so much, I'd gotten so much insights, seen a lot of similarities between agriculture and manufacturing. And I think that was when the light bulb went on for me. And I thought to myself, look, when I was in China, I saw what Alibaba had done for the Chinese manufacturing markets. And I was like, what if we have an Alibaba for African agriculture and really use that as a vehicle to really improved production of farmers. And that was really where the light bulb. So there were so many things and insights being like out of that failure being gotten at the same time that really made me feel like, you know what, I can't just learn all of this and pack my bag and go. I need to prove that I can make this thing work.
I'm quite keen on understanding that mindset of setting things up as a production floor. So if you can just walk us through like an example, how and I'm saying this for on behalf of people who are listening and they're trying to understand if I want to apply the same thinking, to my own business. I would assume this also work for service business if you apply that same mindset, right? So how can one apply that practically to what they are doing?
There are a lot of methodologies when it comes to things that have worked and things that haven't worked. And I think for every business, um, there is a lot of analogies that you can learn from different verticals, and bring that into what you are doing. I think it's really being able to see that similarities, like what are the fundamental things or the first principle things in that other vertical that I can bring into what I'm doing. So when I look at manufacturing and agriculture as an example, the reason why at Complete Farmer we are very data driven is for every production that happens in a factory, you have the blueprints, you have the designs, and everyone from supply chain have figured out which vendors to procure from. Finance on that same design have been able to cost what it will cost to make it and how much it's going to be sold for, and be able to give this to all the other people I'm working with so that all those functions will be able to do their work. And I think that's where having some sort of experience in an industry and being able to draw those similarities come very handy. One of the other things I think as an engineer I've been trained on was like building processes and systems. And as mechanical engineers, like you have to build engines, you have to know how to balance forces, you need to know basic mechanics and stuff. And a lot of that, even though it's in like inanimate objects, when you bring that same level of thinking into business, like or into business or into finance, it may not be the same engine you are building. But if you then start to think of your business as an engine, okay, so then where's the crankshaft going to be? Where's the flywheel going to be? And sort of use this analogy to sort of design a system, right? And that's really, I think, one of the key thing that I think makes or how I run the business Complete Farmer is really like a machine that's being built, and the data really allows us to do that. If I'm as many engineers will know, look, a flywheel has to gather momentum to keep things going. So in my business, what's that flywheel? What metric do I look at? That's like the lever to keep things going and running, right? And so drawing a lot of those analogies is really what has brought us this far. And I think it's really first principle thinking. How do you take first principles of something and use that to build something else?
Thanks for that. And one of the first things you did when you started Complete Farmer was you started a crowdfunding model. It was something that was very popular, at some point,
Yeah.
but you quickly transitioned away from that model. What happened? What did you discover and why did you transition? And what did you decide to do differently?
So I think at the time we were just fixated on solving the problem, which was when we started Complete Farmer, we just wanted to digitize African agriculture and make it effective or build that factory floor for a farm type of business. But then that was just the solution. We really didn't have a business model for our solution. So when we started building this solution, we started from first principle, trying to figure out how do you lay out a farm? How do you use data to be able to determine your production? How do you make sure you are getting the output that the market wants? We were able to answer most of those questions. What we were not able to answer in the very early days was how do you capture value from all of this? And one of the first attempts to capture value was to say, look, why now that we figured out how to build farms and make them effective, why don't we rather get capital from the external markets and build farms all over Africa? It was a very lofty ambition at the time. And so that's what led us to the crowdfunding. It's like, okay, we figured out this magic sauce. We really want to double down on it. but we didn't have the capital. And crowdfunding was a way to be able to gather that capital to expand this in different places. But then, just as like seeing a business as a machine, we got to a point where I saw that as like a saturation point. We got to a point before, right before 2020, where with farming you have like seasons, and we could only do our crowdfunding within a short window. That's on the off season period. And no matter how much we tried, we always plateaued at a particular amount. We couldn't raise more funding beyond that amount because we didn't have infinite amount of time to be basically fundraising or crowdfunding. So that was one. I think we saw that the business model got to a point of that saturation and stagnation. The biggest farm we managed to build at the time we had about 1,200 acres of production ongoing, and we just couldn't raise enough funding to be able to do more than this 1,200 acres. Um, and then another thing happened, early 2020 was COVID. So when COVID hit, it just blew the business model. Nobody was now even looking to invest in anything that wasn't a security or a bond. And so people were really not looking to invest in farming. And the market dynamics also changed when COVID hit. When COVID hit, there was on the demand side, this is like the FMCG side of things, the processor side of things. A lot of them were looking for more supply. So the demand increased drastically, but supply wasn't there because we were not getting funding to be able to grow these farms. So that was the key moment where we realized that this crowdfunding model isn't scalable. And I keep telling people from the lessons we learned from that, farming is not a security. You can't treat farming as a debt instrument. You could treat farming as an equity instrument, but the people who were giving us the money, who were crowdfunding into this, were just thinking of it as debt. It was like, I'll give you this money, and then in 6 months, you pay me back with my profits, whether the farm was good or not, right? So all these constraints led to the fact that we couldn't supply past a certain amount. So we needed to pivot. So COVID actually forced us to pivot at the time. And it was a very critical time for us to be doing a pivot. We were out of money, I remember at the time, but there were all indications that this business wasn't going to be scalable. And we needed to do that pivot. And that's what really made us pivot into a marketplace platform. So we saw all the demand, and we were like, okay, if all these people want food produce, obviously we can't do the growing now because we don't have enough capital to do the growing. How do we work with other farmers to grow? And then we use what they've grown to meet the demand. And that's what led to what Complete Farmer is today and for our pivot. And I would say, since we made that pivot, we've really been able to scale the business to where it is today.
So what is Complete Farmer doing today?
So today, what we've done is we've built a marketplace platform where any buyer at all in the world looking to source for agriculture commodities can build their supply chain on this platform and source directly from farmers. These farmers are supervised and supported by Complete Farmer to grow to meet their unique quality specifications. So if you were a buyer looking for soybeans with a certain amount of oil content, or you were looking for a variety of sweet potatoes, we are able to give you farmers who would be trained and will be guided with our protocols to grow exclusively for your offtake and to your specification. So for these businesses, we are helping them to sort of do that backward integration in their supply chain and make sure they have an exclusive source of supply from farmers that we work with across Africa. We do this with a lot of data because some of the specifications that we get can be very granular. You could get people specifying like the protein contents that they are looking for or the particular variety that they are looking for. And so we have to sort of also figure out the supply chain to be able to deliver this. And a good example is sweet potato. In Ghana, the orange flesh is now gaining more popularity, but we have farmers who are growing like the the white sweet potato. And we get buyers coming to say, I want orange. So how do you now work with farmers who were used to growing white sweet potatoes to make sure that they have the planting material, they have the fertilizers that they need, and they are also trained enough to be able to grow an orange flesh with potato and all the whites that they are used to. So that's a lot of the work that we do at Complete Farmer in a nutshell.
Still on complete farmer. So if I understand what you do now, you are customizing solutions or products for your off takers. Many would think that that business model, it would be difficult to make the economics work, the unit economics, because you could produce, you could set up the system for a sweet potato off taker, and then he only does 1 year with you, or he
Yeah.
only orders a particular volume. How do you make that economics work when you are razor focused on individual off takers?
So on an aggregate level, it's really what we've seen rather now is the demand increasing. So when it comes to food, right, and that's where agriculture is the exciting industry to be in, is when it comes to food. Food prices and food demand has kept increasing year on year, right? And so what we see on our platform is we are getting orders. I think last year, 2025, we only did close to 26% of all the orders that were placed on the platform. We could only supply 26%. So we feel like there's more being left on the table rather than being taken off. But then I think this industry has a high retention as well. So let's say if like an FMCG comes to you to say, okay, supply me ginger. Once you do that first supply, they start building reliance on you. They ask you for the next one. Because for those businesses, it's raw material for their production. So they always need reliable supply. And what tends to happen is these businesses rather tend to keep you busy. So now, because a business may not want you to supply to anyone else, they will tell you, look, can you rather supply us? They go from 100 metric tons and sign a contract for 1,000 metric tons. So it's an industry where I think what you are saying we haven't felt that because the demand for food and food prices is really skyrocketing. And all these industries are looking for places where they can have exclusive supply. For example, a Unilever, a P&G, or a Nestle may be in the same market, will be still competing for suppliers. And there are very few of these suppliers that can meet these standards of this type of buyers, right? So rather what we do see is the need for these buyers to rather have exclusive relationships than rather to like say, look, we are not ordering again. The instances where they may not order again is when you've not been able to meet their quality. Yeah,
No, that was what I was going to actually say. That from what you've said, what I realize is the only reason they will move away from you is because they have faced problems with you, either
exactly.
quality or supply problem. You are not able to supply as much as they wanted you to. So that's the only
Exactly.
reason. So it's an interesting insight because I didn't think about it from that perspective before. So it's really you more or less have a market that you own. As long as you can continue to fulfill and meet their
As
demands, they
long
will
as
stay with you as
exactly.
long as possible.
Exactly. But that's also where the hard work is.
Yes.
I think now you see I have a lot of gray hair now. It's where the work is it becomes it's a business where you are always chasing. So we are always not we've never been in a position since we started at the moment where we are ahead of the demand. It's a business where there's still more on the table, and depending on how much you decide to chase, it's a lot of work, because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built that's involved. And I think this is where for us, having the support of Sahel Capital to build the initial infrastructure was a big boost, for us to be able to go into this market. Because this type of buyers that have this sort of behavior, they are buyers that like long-term relationships. They want to see that you have the infrastructure to support the skill that they want to, right? So it's really I'll say the entry barriers is that initial infrastructure that needs to be put up to be able to serve this demand. But the demand is definitely 100% available if you have the infrastructure on the ground.
Do you think the infrastructure is the major barrier to entry for most people? Because I would assume that if this demand is so vibrant, many people will be coming into the industry. I've seen many people come in, but they've also gone out. right? But
Yeah.
you have stayed, you've grown. So do you think that that is a barrier to entry for most people, or
I
is
would
there
say
something
that
else?
I'll say today what I consider as competition is middlemen. We have middlemen who are able to sort of buy the maize, the rice, the soybeans, but you don't have middlemen buying pineapple or necessarily tomato on a large scale. And that's just because of the infrastructure. Now, if you look at the perishables, because they are perishables, you need a cold chain facility. You need to have efficiency. You can't have someone delaying you when you have only, for instance, pineapple has like 3 to 4 weeks shelf life. So the moment the farmer harvests, you need to have the infrastructure in place to make sure that within 3 days it's in Europe and it may be on the shelf for another week, and then it has 2 weeks left to be able to remain a good pineapple to be eaten. So because of that, right, you don't see a lot of middlemen meddling in those type of value chains. Where you see middlemen meddling in the value chains is where infrastructure is not so heavy, and that's where the grains and cereal comes in. If I dry soybeans or maize today and I have a silo, I can keep it for 6 months. There really isn't enough rush, right? So what this means is that a lot of the agricultural value chain is being ignored because of the lack of infrastructure. A lot of the opportunities in Africa for other commodities that can be supplied, things like avocados. In West Africa, we really don't see much of avocado production because no one is willing to do that investment, right? And
Can avocados be produced in West Africa?
yeah, avocados have been produced historically in parts of Ghana before, but now because of the lack of cold chain, we are not able to compete. So I think a lot of the barriers to entry is really that infrastructure piece, and then the infrastructure then comes with know-how. So you can have the best cold chain, but if you don't know what temperature to keep pineapple at, and your people are not trained to be able to handle pineapple, that's where people start getting their fingers bent. And so getting the infrastructure and the know-how is really, really critical within this industry.
Yeah, you collect so much data. I mean, anybody that has visited your, by the way, I love your office. You know that. You know, I'm one of the biggest fans of your office. I'll say you will give me a space in that place one of these days. You
Yeah.
know, you collect tons of data. 20, 30 years from now, in fact, that's too far. 10 years from now, do you see Complete Farmer as an agriculture company or as a data company?
Whenever I get asked that question by investors, I ask, look, is Amazon a tech company or it's a logistic company?
Okay, that's a good one.
No, but I think no, it's very important. The reason why we first of all collect this data and what we've seen is like when you take pineapple, for instance, if you don't harvest the right time, pineapple is a crop that um, it gets sweet. The crop develops sweetness when it's on the parent plant. So let's say if you're a farmer that was in a hurry to harvest the pineapple because it has a short shelf life, you don't have cold chain infrastructure, you'll be forced to harvest the pineapple prematurely. Right now, if that pineapple has to travel to London, the harvest time is different from if it's traveling to Singapore. Right. So that is a data problem. And that's where for us it's like if, for instance, another example is chili pepper. If you harvest chili pepper too early when it hasn't got enough ripeness, it still remains green. It stops ripening. But there's a threshold of ripeness that even if you harvest, some parts may be green, but it's able to keep ripening. And before maybe the container gets opened somewhere in Indonesia, it's totally red. Meanwhile, when it was leaving Ghana, it was red and green, right? So this level of optimization of the supply chain, like knowing when, if I'm shipping chili pepper to China versus shipping chili pepper to Turkey, given the lead times and all of that, when should I harvest my chili pepper? Now, you take into consideration the fact that different farmers are having different seasonalities, different soils, different pests and diseases in their locality. it means that you need a lot of data to even just determine when these farmers should be able to harvest the chili pepper to be able to make it to the buyer in good shape, right? And these are complex data problems that no one has been able to answer in the region. And that's really what we are trying to solve for. We are trying to build a knowledge bank where anyone who wants to go into agriculture and says, look, I have a buyer in Germany. What do I do to make sure that I'm competitive when my product gets to Germany? We should be able to guide and support that person to go from production all the way till the goods get to Germany. So that level of data is where we are trying to get to. I don't like to use AI, and I think that's a big buzz now. But then the potential of just having how data structures agriculture in itself is so huge. Like for another example is when you look at a lot of the fertilizer blends that come into Africa, you see NPK 2020. These are all generic blends. There is no fertilizer blend that is looking at how to customize the blend for African farmers. And why is this? It's basically data. Because of the lack of data of knowing, okay, farmers in Wari or farmers in Damango in Accra, this is the nature of their soil. So if I'm a fertilizer producer selling my fertilizers for farmers in Damongo, this is how their soils are, and this is how I need to mix it. If the farmers are in Wari, this is how their soil is, and this is how I need to mix it. There really isn't that much going on. So what you realize is we are just supplying generic blends of fertilizers in the African markets. Every farmer is taught to apply fertilizer the same way, but they have different soils. And so a lot of the challenges that we see in agriculture, from policy, government policy to supply chain optimization, are all data problems. And what we are trying to do is really become that data bank, to really, really make sure that Africa agriculture is competitive. And that's basically what we started doing, at least for the countries that we find ourselves in today.
It's a long journey. I don't think it's a 100-meter dash, because like you
Yeah,
said, these things are customized, for specific locations. So
yeah,
I can see how that has been a problem, and cracking that problem definitely creates a significant opportunity for whoever is able to solve that problem. Yeah.
yeah,
Brilliant. No, thanks for that. Um, one of the things that I found out when I was preparing for this interview was that at the point in which your dad passed away, you almost you were writing the exams and you almost could not do the exam. And there was a professor that said something to you. He said that
yeah.
this is a call to manhood, right? So for you, how has that phrase? What is the impact of that phrase to you now? What's the importance of it to you now when you think about that statement?
Really, and I think as Dr. Ejapon, he taught me production engineering back in Kumasi KNUST. Um, and I was about to take his paper. I was really shattered. And he pulled me aside to just try to calm me down. But this thing he said about the loss of my dad being a call to manhood was so, I think in retrospect now has become it's really become so true to me, in a lot of ways. I think in my fancy mind as a young student, I was just thinking I'm going to finish school. I had aspirations to one day work in NASA, build machines. Um, but when I go home after my education, right after my dad passed, I remember when I got to Accra, I only had 20 CDs in my pocket. I didn't have money to buy credit to tell my friends, look, I'm home. And so for me, it was like, this is what I'm going to start life with. But I think every step of the journey now has looked very intentional, because I would say it was really unfair how my dad passed away, but the aftermath of it really made me a man. Really made me be able to take risk, because I was looking at all my siblings and my mom, and I'm like, how do we as a family move? I felt like the huge responsibility was on my shoulder as the first son, and that really made me take risks that I would definitely have taken if not for losing my dad. Um, it's also made me a bit bold to really face the world. I think at the point where you feel like you have nothing else left, you really, when you're at your last resort, you really take the most drastic actions. And I remember, like, when we started Complete Farmer, there were periods where we were just not able to even make payroll for about 6 months. I had to move the business into my room, but there was this drive that was like, okay, we need to keep going. We really, and that was really just because the business was all I had, right? I was in a position where being an entrepreneur wasn't a luxury. It wasn't something I was going to do, and then I had another career plan. It was really the making of me, really. So putting myself in that position, I would say, like, I look at other people ask me, like, how did you go through all this period, losing your co-founders and having to bootstrap for almost a year with a team of about 30 people? How did you go through all these periods? And it's really just being in that position where this is it, really. And I think that that's a unique position that I got myself to, because I see many entrepreneurs now where they have options. You have a safety net. And whenever you have a safety net, whenever this journey gets very hard, you would really just like to go fall back into that safety net. And so being in a place where I didn't have any safety net meant that I really needed to make this work. And I think that drive is what has kept Complete Farmer going. Yeah.
I'm sure your dad, your mom, your siblings will be super proud of what you've been able to build, from Complete Farmer today. Um, on fundraising, you have done phenomenally well. I mean, you're probably one of the the pace setters when it comes to the ability to raise funds, and it has taken a toll on you as well. So, what would you say any entrepreneur that is thinking of raising capital, what should they prioritize? How should they think about this? How should they go into that process?
So I would say when it comes to fundraising, really, it's not just the entrepreneur doing the fundraising, it's the business. And what I mean by this is fundraising takes you, the funder, it takes you really off of the business. But during fundraising is when the business is being most scrutinized. And so you are not really looking after the business, yet people are looking at your business, right? And so before, I think, going into any fundraise, it's really making sure that there are systems in place for you to leave the business. And there are systems in place that if anyone comes looking, the business doesn't suffer for it. Because it's really going to take a lot of your time. I would say fundraising is also part of, like, our strategy. I don't think the way we've approached fundraising is like, it's not because, oh, we need money and that's why we need to fundraise. We fundraise because we have a need, or we have part of our solution that needs some money. And I think the good thing was, for us, we raised different instruments of funding. So usually when a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking of fundraise, they want to only run to the VCs. But we have had to do like a combination of debts, because we have to build infrastructure, right? So all our infrastructure is built on debt. We need working capital to keep buying from farmers. That's also run by debt. And so having a clear strategy on, okay, I'm going into the capital markets. What do I need the money for? And having a clear strategy on of how to pay back. It makes the next round easier, if I'm to say. But then I think in the first round is where you really need to do a lot of work, because really nobody knows your business. People are now hearing about you probably for the first time. There's a lot of skepticism. I remember my first fundraise, I spoke to about 139 investors, and only five said yes at the time. And I have the CRM for this. But I think the good thing with doing all of that work is now there are a lot of VCs or investment firms in Africa that, when you mention Complete Farmer, I have pitched to them before, right? And that is something, right? That's they now being able to see, okay, how this company has evolved over time, and it makes subsequent fundraising easier. So I see a lot of founders who speak to 5 or 10 investors, hear 10 no's, and then that's it. The truth is, at the beginning stages, nobody knows your business, and so you shouldn't be surprised at the no's. But it's really worth it putting in the no's. I think another thing was also fundraising is where I get a lot of advice, free advice from at different stages of the business. Speaking to investors who have seen or know the industry or have seen other businesses fail or tried what you are trying and have failed is where you get to learn a lot. And I think in my first round, speaking to that many investors, I heard a lot of reasons why the initial model, the crowdfunding model, wasn't going to work really. And I think in the last round we also did, there was a lot of challenge around scalability and a lot of advice that came from that as well. So for me, I think the way I've approached fundraising is really like, look, I can hear the no, but there is some feedback that you need to give me when you say no. And I take the feedback and keep working on the business. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the business. I wouldn't say I'm good at fundraising. I would say I have a team that makes it easy for me to leave the business and go fundraise. If not, it's a big tool. It's a big tool. Hence, a lot of this gray hair again.
And I don't think it gets, or rather, I think it gets easier with time as you
Yeah,
fundraise. Once
yeah,
you've now started demonstrating performance, people are even now
exactly,
approaching you for
exactly.
for to invest.
And
Okay.
yeah, and I think that we are this current fundraise. We are also doing some secondaries. So it's always good to like also return capital as well. I think, and that's supposed to be part of the strategy. Like, how do you make sure? Because it makes the next investor more confident once you're a business that has returned capital to your investors before. So really happy that we are doing that for the first investors that were able to support us as well.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue to talking about the team. You've said a lot about your team, and I think a big part of processes and systems that you put in place is really built on teams. What kind of a leader would you say you are?
It's very difficult to put it in one word, but I think I'm still in terms of leadership. I'm still an evolving leader. Let me put it that way. So a lot of the way I approach leadership is with a lot of curiosity and learning. If you come to my office, you see a lot of books on leadership and different things or things people have had to do to build businesses. I'm someone who is more interested in the problem, and I think my team sees that. I think when people see that, okay, Desmond is not just doing this for the money. So if it requires me to go to the farm, if it requires me to sleep in the bush till the problem gets solved, that's what I'm going to do. And I think just leading that way and being with people who get it, who when I say get it, they get what you are trying to achieve. It's much easier. So I spend a lot of time also like trying to get my team to understand. Look, what's the vision here? What are we trying to achieve here? Because a lot of people, I would say, like it's not common to also find people join your business who already know or have experienced like a business scaling like what we want to do in most parts of the continent. We've not seen a lot of IPOs. So if you are looking for someone who has experience in IPOs, like and seeing, okay, a business can get to IPO and this is what it means for the business, there's very few people who have had that exposure. So I think as a leader, one of the things you need to keep doing is to keep selling the vision to say, guys, look, I know you've not seen what an IPO look like before, and I haven't seen it before, but this is what it would look like if we should get there, and try to always get people aligned that way. So that's one of the ways I like to lead. I also expect a lot of ownership from the people I lead. Because, like I said, with as the life of an entrepreneur, sometimes I'm in the bush, sometimes I'm fundraising, sometimes I'm meeting with buyers. I'm not always going to be everywhere. And I like for my team to really have ownership wherever they are stationed and make sure they are the CEO at that point as well. So that's really how I like to lead my team. I think I have a set of amazing people who are willing to do this dirty work with me and keep building this business with me.
You know, you said something about reading a lot of books. I recall when I came to your office, you actually gave me a book, one on the military that was written by an
Yeah,
ex-US military man on
I think
leadership.
it's
So
turn the ship around.
no, 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 it's not that one. You had two of it. I can't recall the name now, but I'll probably find it. And I know I read the book. Very, very solid book on leadership. So yes, you really do have a very large library of books in your office, yeah, which is going to be one of the last questions I'm going to ask you as we are tapering this now is what book are you reading now? And what book would you recommend to somebody, an entrepreneur, to go read that has really impacted you in ways beyond measure?
So the book I'm reading now is called Playing to Win. It's written. I know Deji, you have background in Procter and Gamble. So it's one of the CEOs. I've forgotten the
Yeah, I know the
name.
book. I think it's Laughly or something like that.
Laughly, yeah, Laughly.
Yes.
That's what I'm reading now. I'm reading it now. I've read it before, but I'm reading it again because it's the beginning of the year. We are going into strategy sessions, and I think the whole team is reading it just to help us make sure that we are approaching strategy development the right way as well. But I really like the book because it's I think coming from an FMCG space where competition is very real, strategy becomes very real at that level as well. I think a lot of businesses or tech businesses may feel like because we are disruptors, there really isn't much competition. But I think when you read that book and you look at how strategy is approached, I think it really, really creates a certain level of urgency or an intentionality on how to approach building your business, which is what I love about that book. Yeah.
And what book would you has really impacted you over the years that you know really helped you on this course that you're on?
Wow, lots of books, Deji. I do product a lot, and I think from a product perspective, I would recommend Build by Tony Fadell, and also Working Backwards by Colin Bra from Amazon. I read a lot of books from Amazon because I like to think of Complete Farmer as Amazon for African agriculture. Um, so those are books that I would say are books that are really top of mind, that have impacted the way I lead. I think Brene Brown, any Brene Brown book on leadership, and I think leadership requires a lot of self awareness, emotional intelligence, and I think Brene Brown helps me make sense of it, uh, of it all, the emotions behind the business, and how people are feeling, which is very critical as well. So there are quite a number of books that have really, really shaped how I think of building a business. The book that I would say changed my life really was called Finding Fish. It's by Antoine Fisher. It's a biography of this Black American guy who I think I like to say we have a similar story as well. But yeah, Finding Fish by Antoine Fisher is the book that has probably had the most impact on me.
Thanks for sharing those. We will include the link to these books on Amazon in the description so people can have the opportunity to go find these books as well. My last question: you are a young father, uh, and you're happily married. You have a young daughter. How do you combine and manage your current life schedule with raising a young family?
Wow. Truth be told, it's amazing to come home and have people happy to see you, no matter what your day has been. But it's been very hard, I would say, to find a balance. I think I have an amazing family. My wife is very supportive of me and she takes a lot of the slack. But I think what one thing I'm getting good at and still something I'm working on is really knowing how to shut down. Whenever I close from work and my journey from office to the house is like a shutting down process, right? So making sure I get home and really not having to think about work. And I think that has been very hard. Really trying to separate myself from the work. But it's also been my team as well. I think I've really been able to look at building the business to also suit the lifestyle I want to have, and optimize for my weaknesses. So I think I do still have amazing people that allow me to have that balance. Another thing I've done in recent times that has really helped is I got a leadership coach who has really helped me to be able to figure out like balancing the demands of work and family life, making sure I'm prioritizing things, and not running wild all the time. So yeah, it's still a work in progress, but it's really just for me. It's amazing. It's also, I was telling someone, a friend of mine, that the day I held my little daughter in my hands, I became more ambitious. I knew that like it all has to work and it has to mean something. And I think it's really giving me a new drive in this day and age to build something impactful. Yeah.
No, that's really, really, really quite insightful. You're right. The day you hold those little ones in your hand, everything just changes about you. It's like a
Yeah.
360-degree paradigm shift, completely. I know I said last question the other time, but really, really last question now.
No worries.
If there's an entrepreneur that is listening to this podcast and they are trying to find the advice on how they should build, what should they pay attention to, what kind of character should they bring forth, what is that thing you want to leave with entrepreneurs that are listening to this podcast?
So I would say any entrepreneur out there building a business, I would say you really need to also think of it as a journey to discovering your own path. Different businesses, even in the same industry, have different requirements. They have different capital requirements. They have different strategic requirements, different people requirements, but also different leadership requirements. And I think we as entrepreneurs usually focus on, okay, there are frameworks to figure out, okay, am I is my fundraising strategy, does my fundraising strategy fit my business, does my product solve the problem? There are so many of these frameworks out there to help you, but what there really isn't a framework for is, am I the right leader for my business? Am I the right person to lead my business? And sometimes the answer is no, maybe, or 60%. Um, and whatever the gap is, it's going to be your own journey of growth. And I think a lot of times that is really not said enough, that whatever gap or leadership gap or whatever personal or person or people related gap there is, for you, the founder, there really isn't much resources out there to bridge that gap. So you should know that you are going to go on this whole journey, and you need to be willing to become what the business needs to be able to be successful. And sometimes that is the hard part. Sometimes that's the part where a lot of, if not handled carefully, can enter into the domain of imposter syndrome, or could enter into the domain of overly confident and things fails. But that's really the part that I think you need to figure out, how do I address the gaps that I need to become the leader that builds this solution. So that's what and for me, I would say reading a lot of books helps me find my path. For other people, it may be having a mentor or talking to people. I think there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more of the older generation helping young business and young founders figure out, how do you bridge these gaps and make sure that the business doesn't turn you into something else, or you don't turn the business into something else.
Thank you very much, Desmond. It's been a pleasure having you on this episode of the Diary of an African Entrepreneur.
So the pleasure is mine. I think more of this needs to be shared and more of this needs to be done, so that we can find a blueprint to building businesses on the continent. So happy to contribute my quota to this to this knowledge bank that you are building, Deji.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you're right. We'll keep doing this, until we are able to build a strong, community and network of entrepreneurs building businesses across the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.